हेलो 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 एवरीवन, नमस्ते। कैसे हैं आप सब? होप यू आर हैविंग अ ग्रेट एंड टू द ईयर। एक्चुअली आज का लाइव मैं सोच रहा यार, ये सॉफ्टवेयर मुझे दे क्यों नहीं रहा है? एक ऑप्शन टू बी एबल टू एक्चुअली गो लाइव, एक बटन आना चाहिए। एंड देन आई रियलाइज्ड आई एक्चुअली scheduled, एक सेकेंड गाइस, ये अच्छा ओके इसको, हाँ तो व्हाट आई रियलाइज्ड वाज कि if I don't I I set the wrong date, मतलब 2026 का December 30th कर दिया था। I was like यार तब तक तो ये I was just a stupid error on my part। फिर मैंने सोचा चलो यार अभी 5 मिनट का, चलो 10:35 कर देते हैं। एनीवे आई थिंक शेव कर लेना चाहिए। दैट वुड बी द फर्स्ट पॉइंट ऑफ ऑर्डर, क्योंकि एक्चुअली अभी मैं अपने रेगुलर स्टूडियो स्पेस में नहीं हूँ। आई एम सिटिंग इन अल्टरनेटिव स्पेस, क्योंकि घर पे थोड़े गेस्ट आए हुए हैं ये वो। बट this is actually turning out better than what I usually have. But again, it's showing up in my unkempt beard a lot more than what I would appreciate. So let's see if you want to keep up this one or go देखते हैं शेव कैसे करते हैं। And now I'll have to actually think about, do I want to keep this studio setup or actually go back to my previous one like I used to have once the guest leaves and everything. So we'll see. Anyway guys, मैंने सोचा आज एक छोटा वाला we'll do a nugget, simply because it's a topic that we have covered in many lives, and ऐसा नहीं है कि I don't think that there is anything that unexpected that's happening with this. So मतलब ठीक है, मुझे अच्छा लगा देख के कि some of the things that we have been mentioning on this channel, they're actually coming to life. Of course I'm not trying to claim कि भाई हमने बोला तो आ गया ऐसा, none of that. But all I'm saying is कि at least there seems to be some sort of, at least we as a channel are maybe thinking the right direction on what's good for the Canadian society moving forward. Of course ये जो भी हमने बातें की हैं, ये कोई 30 मार खान तो है नहीं। You can actually just have if you have friends, you can have a sensible discussion, and then you can kind of, you can get to these ideas that that are being discussed in all these articles. So chalo guys, let me get to this. Let's see how this works out. Okay, great. Wow. So actually what we mentioned, what we have been saying is कि okay, midterms and tariffs next year, again the CUSMA is up for review, right? So ये जो NAFTA treaty है, that's going to be up for review. इसमें लिखा है यहाँ पे 2026 could be a critical year for Canada-US relationships. I don't think we are at a could anymore. It is definitely going to be a critical year. मतलब there is a lot. This is the first full year where there will be tariffs. This is also the year where NAFTA is going to get renegotiated, and this is also the year Canada is going to, have to fully start living with the fact that the days of free trade are over. At least a part of this year, we were blessed with the previous policies. For this year, we'll have basically none of those advantages that in some form or the other we took for granted. But of course it's just not a option anymore. Maybe things will change when the administration in the US changes, but I think the lesson to be taken away is, you can you always hope for the best, but be prepared for the worst. And I think, if anything, 2025 has taught us is okay, apart from, I guess, maybe the pandemic was a much, much bigger problem that we faced. But again, 2025 has only cemented that knowledge in other ways that, you know, कुछ भी हो सकता है. You can only just be prepared to the best of your abilities, which in my opinion, okay, for maybe a decade or two, Canada was not really thinking in that direction. But it's good that it is now thinking in a direction that is, you know, more, it's resting on more legs. The chair, instead of just resting on two legs, now is trying to go on to four, five, maybe six. So let's see this quickly. ये तो सिर्फ headline है. I mean, I think I just wanted to start with this to give sort of a background of what we can expect. Let me quickly go to what the meat article for the day is, which is, well, this one. Actually, we will come back a bit to why we got there in the first place as well. Okay, chalo guys. Yeah, there we go. So yeah, आज का main है. Canada's push for new export markets is starting to pay off. So as we've been saying, economic diversification is going to be the theme of the next few years. Not just for Canada, but any country that used to, or that has a heavy trade with the US. Well, you will still have US as a big market, but you're also going to have credible alternatives so that you're not just relying on one place to be able to take in your exports and, just one set of people buying all your products. So this is by Joanna Smith. This is from The Logic. Again, sources in the description. So always you can just find this for yourself. The data shows diversifying Canada's trade won't happen overnight, but that doesn't mean it's not happening. So this is a good sign. Again, when you try to diversify, when you try to start forging other alliances, it doesn't happen overnight. In geopolitics, it's always, in global trade and international relations, it's always aligned interests. There's no friend or enemy as such. So let's go down and see quickly. Prime Minister Mark Carney pledged during the spring election campaign to reduce Canada's economic reliance on a relationship with the US he described as over or at least forever changed because of President Donald Trump's targeted tariffs. Yeah, there's not much to disagree with over here. I don't know if the relationship with the US is over. I don't think it can ever be over between Canada and US, in the sense that, we are next to each other. So and literally most Canadians live, again, I'm reiterating this fact, right, that most Canadians live, I think, what, 200 kilometers from the border or something. So it can never be over, but it has definitely changed. Again, forever changed का तो नहीं कह सकते, क्योंकि यार फिर वो ये इंटरनेशनल रिलेशन में forever क्या होता है. मतलब if you're saying in terms of, okay, we're going to be more vigilant about, our own trade practices, that should have always just been the case, right? It was more of an error on our part than anything else, because, I mean, you look at India and China, two big powers that basically exist right next to each other. इंडिया और चाइना में हमेशा ट्रेड होता है, बट इंडिया और चाइना में skirmishes भी होते हैं on the military level. तो both are coexisting at the same time. Now India banned Chinese apps, Chinese newspapers में इंडिया के बारे में लिखा जाएगा. All these things keep happening, but trade also exists. Now again, there'll never be a conflict with the US as such, not in the physical sense or anything, but of course there will be um, this is more of a reality check on the economic side for Canada, that you can never always rely on one trade partner. Just because अच्छे दिन आते हैं, बट ऐसा नहीं है कि अच्छे दिन हर समय रहेंगे. तो yeah, I mean, I agree with most of that statement, but ठीक है, using, I guess, I guess this is the author of the article who has said, okay, at least forever changed. So ठीक है, I find that a little too extreme, but it doesn't generally, there's nothing forever when it comes to international relations. The Liberal government has since dialed back that rhetoric and lifted most retaliatory tariffs on US goods, but Carney is still working to secure new and stronger trading relationships around the world. In October, he pledged to double exports to non US markets by 2035. I would think maybe if we can achieve this by 2030, that wouldn't hurt. But again, I'm not the one sitting in Ottawa, so I don't know what it will actually take to have all this trade move to non-US markets. Actually, एक तो थोड़ा image का भी problem आता है इसमें, right? Canada is always seen as a staunch ally of the US. It more or less always is a staunch ally of the US. तो वो image भी move करना पड़ेगा दुनिया में, right? And there are some countries listed here, and you saw those flags in the thumbnail. There are some countries listed that, okay, we are trying to have more trade with them, but I will also point out to sort of one oddity that I've spotted. Let's go down that. Let's see. The only thing is, okay, can we achieve this by 2030, not just 2035? Because 2035 we are saying it's a decade. वही होता है कि अगर आप 5 साल का प्लान बनाओगे तो शायद 7-8 साल में होएगा. That's always my take कि okay, you dream ambitious. If you don't reach it, okay, it's fine. But if you dream ambitious, you're always motivated to get there as fast as possible. Obviously, Canadian interests first, so that shouldn't be compromised on in any way. But I would say 2035, maybe too long a timeline. But again, I don't know what, I'm not entirely privy to how this decision or how this year was determined. Overnight, though, and the country's progress towards its mm, towards toward its goal may be slow to show up in trade data, which this year's US government shutdown delayed more than usual. Okay. Freshest information suggests the shift has just begun. Canada exported nearly 430 billion worth of goods to the US from Jan to September, the latest month for which StatsCan figures are available. This is down by 3% over the same period, but Canada still sent 3/4 of its total exports to its largest trading partner. Not a surprise, because I mean, even if you've just been able to see a 3% change in things, that's not a bad. I mean, if you're again, if we just using rule of 72, 3% pay, if you wanted to double that, it'll take about 20 years. So आप कहते हो कि आप 15% पे 5 साल में होता है, तो you can think about 20 years to get there. Still, there are signs that exports to other countries are growing, with the UK, EU, China, Singapore, and Indonesia leading the way. The skyrocketing price of gold amid global uncertainty has played a role, but a close look at the markets where Canada's exports increase the most suggest other, more lasting ways to grow. Okay, let's see. Canadians have woken up. He told The Logic in a recent interview. So, International Trade Minister, he is Canada's, okay, Maninder Sidhu. We are overexposed to the US, and we need to be able to diversify into other markets. Again, a statement of fact at this point. He recently launched consultations on trade talks with several countries, including India. which is great to see. But he will also announce a trade diversification strategy aimed at making better use of existing deals. So, this is where I was getting to, right? You have ultimately UK, EU, okay, fairly large markets. China, again, pretty large market. Singapore, small, almost not too big. Indonesia, again, a pretty large market for natural resources. But again, I would say once there's a deal with India, that'll be probably the most beneficial over the next decade or so. Projected as the fastest growing economy over the next decade, a deal with India is crucial to Canada's diversification. But again, I hope there is an understanding that over reliance on any one trade partner is not going to serve the country's benefit. And I think I like the trade minister's statement on that, that the country's collective sense of urgency will help. I hope when he says we are overexposed to the US, he's also taking into account that, okay, while we are overexposed to the US, in our attempt to reduce that, we shouldn't get overexposed elsewhere. That's my take to that. Sidhu ran a customs brokerage firm. Okay, that's fine. Ottawa pledged 159 million over 3 years in the budget for trade financing programs to assist firms trying to enter and grow in new markets. I'm not sure how common these are, right? I mean, how do you assist Canadian companies to try and grow in new markets? आप उनका marketing budget दे दोगे. I think the key is to allow Canadian companies to become more and more competitive. And that's where we need to focus on having policies internally which allow companies to have more, let's say, disposable budget to actually go out into the world and sell their products. Of course, price will be a big point, because you're gonna sell to start off with. Canada will sell a lot of raw material, oil hai, lumber hai, minerals hai. So if you're gonna try and sell these goods are basically not overly differentiated. It will take the price advantage to be able to actually sell to those countries. Now, the US took away the deals with, I think, Japan and Korea to sell them oil. So, of course, Canada is going into the developing world, I guess, with the exception of, I guess, not really developing world, because you have UK and the EU in there. And then India is a developing country, so is Indonesia. I guess Indonesia comes in the developed HDI range. Singapore, of course, highly developed. EU, UK, all highly developed. So the challenge is, okay, how do you, instead of the government pledging money to give to companies in some form or the other so that they can go out and actually sell in other countries, there should be a focus on how do you make Canadian products more competitive. And that sort of brings me back to that point, right? If the companies have more disposable income, they can invest more in this. But of course, the issue with Canada also is that the whole country is just filled with monopolies in every sphere of life, right? Be it well, maybe not entirely monopolies, but there are few options, right? Banks हैं आपके पास the five banks, pretty much no other option. There are some local ones that have some traction, but they are the big five have a stake in all of them, right? अगर आप ग्रोसरीज में जाते हो तो फिर आपके पास एक बड़ा ग्रुप है जिसने अत के ब्रांड्स खरीद रखे हैं, एंड बाकी सब, यू हैव एन इल्यूजन ऑफ ऑप्शन बट यू डोंट नेसेसरली हैव टू मेनी ऑप्शंस, राइट? फिर आप, obviously there's a whole lobby on dairy products where they just keep getting more and more expensive. No incentive to produce better quality at a lower price because of supply control. um, and again, I've done a whole uh, deep dive live on this topic around what Canada's food inflation, food budget, all these things look like. So please go take a look at those. There we have actually gone over those documents page by page, highlighted important paragraphs and everything. Again, all sources available in those descriptions, so nothing to hide. Here is what the Logic's analysis of export data reveals about the challenges and opportunities. Most of what glitters is actually gold. Yeah, this is nice. This is a nice pun. Value of Canada's merchandise exports to the UK grew about 9.7 billion from Jan to September, a bigger year-over-year increase than any other market. Okay, nearly 96% of that growth, however, came from exports of unwrought gold. Yeah, this itself won't be sustainable. How much gold are you going to give to the UK before, they don't need it anymore? Gold has long been Canada's top export to the UK, with crude oil a distant second. The price of gold has soared this year, and the UK is one of many countries where it is inflating the value of Canada's outbound trade. While the value of Canada's gold exports to the UK increased nearly 58% in the first 3 quarters, the actual quantity of gold shipped across the pond grew by just 8%. So this is more of a price inflation of gold that has led to a much higher dollar value. The quantity of gold has actually not increased that much. Again, India would be a great market for gold. Like, Indians love possessing gold, and there is no two ways about it. It's a huge part of the culture. It's a huge part of how Indians think about finance, um, how they think about wealth creation and preservation. So having a deal with India would definitely be probably the most helpful if Canada does want to focus on gold exports. Who's up and who is down? Canada has grown its exports to overseas market and pulled back from the US. Year over year change. So this is actually a pretty nice graphic to be able to look at. We see that, okay, we have reduced our exports to the US by roughly 13 billion, and then between UK and EU, that delta has been more or less covered. And then with China, Singapore, and Indonesia, we are seeing, you could almost call this as a buffer, or as a soft hedge, that okay, if for any reason the UK drops or the EU drops in 2026, at least we have hopefully an increasing trend with China, Singapore, and Indonesia. Again, saying that okay, there's a little bit of a runway to get that deal signed with India, because getting a deal signed with India will just not be as easy. Um, I guess if you have something with China, then you'll be able to get something with India as well. Um, Canada's merchandise exports to the EU, merchandise exports, that's good, grew by just over 5 billion as September compared to the same period last year, an increase of just over 20% in customs value. That's huge. Oil exports led the way, but exports of canola seeds increased more than tenfold, which is likely a result of China's 100% tariffs on the key Canadian agricultural export. Oh, okay, I had no idea about this. China has 100% tariffs on canola seeds from Canada. Okay, this is interesting to note. Canada also significantly increases shipments of aluminum to Europe as a result of Trump's tariffs on the metal, which are now at 50%. So, okay. Yeah, because now it's good to see that okay, there is a market for aluminum, because that's going to be a very important metal or that already is a very important metal as far as any heavy engineering is concerned. It looks like, okay, Europe is maybe trying to re-industrialize in a way as well. I would actually love to see Canada industrializing and shipping off finished aluminum-based products, steel-based products, because at the end of the day, that's the point at which there is the most value add. But I think that is a little farther down the road, just because, uh, yeah, I mean, you kind of start small. You start sending raw products, and then you start getting mastery over the finished product as well. Of course, Canada's auto industry has suffered just because auto tariffs, etc., have been put in, and a lot of companies who were producing auto parts in Ontario are now moving back into Michigan. Canola versus crude. China effectively closed its market to Canadian canola this year, but crude oil is a different story. After the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion came online in May 2024, Canadian crude exports to China began to soar, especially as China moved away from US oil. This is a welcome change for Canada, no doubt. The value of petroleum exports to the country grew by more than 240% in the first 3 quarters of 2025 compared to the same period last year. As the prospect of a new pipeline from Alberta oil sands to BC coast takes shape, energy is expected to play a big role in Canada's diversification strategy. I hope by the time this pipeline is built up, Canada will actually have a market for this oil, and I feel this is where having a comprehensive trade agreement with India will be critical. And Canada will have to always remember that India's relationship with Russia is gonna be something that Canada will have to navigate, because a lot of the oil India gets is, well, from Russia. And India has consistently said, okay, whether anyone likes it or not, we're going to do this. So only time will tell how this will pan out. But once we have this new pipeline coming all the way to BC, having a deal with India would definitely be helpful, but also having an export market in other, East Asian countries like Japan, Korea, Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, we know the rest. That would definitely be helpful as well. I think we are already making strides because there is more trade happening with Indonesia, which is a big mass of people, big mass of land in that region. So I think Canada is taking the right steps in the right direction over there. The value of Canada's exports to Singapore increased 67%. Exports of crude oil saw the biggest increase, but some of the growth occurred in the aerospace sector, including turbojet parts, as Singapore is a global aviation hub where Bombardier operates a major aircraft maintenance center. Okay. This would be worth looking into because, yeah, I didn't know that. Okay. That Canada was manufacturing turbojet parts, well, within Canada. Okay. Canada's work to meet the new NATO target of spending 5% of GDP on defense will also support trade diversification. Okay. Okay, free trade deal with Indonesia was signed. Once fully implemented, the agreement would increase Canada's exports to Indonesia over the long term by about 216 million, or just over 5%. Yeah, that's great. Okay. Growth areas include electronics, machinery, auto parts, chemicals, metals, and business services. So this is a great mix of products that Canada is looking to send, or I guess to export to Indonesia, because we are not relying too heavily either on digital products or services. It's a mix of hard manufactured products along with, industrial B2B industrial type of items that are needed to fuel any country's growth. And as Indonesia itself grows, they can they will have a huge need to have finished products which will be made out of electronics, machinery, auto parts, chemicals, metals, and business services. It's actually good to see that there is only maybe one or two, depending on how we count, two items here which are purely raw material, which is metals, and then in some form maybe chemicals. Of course, chemicals have to be processed as well. Um, it's good to see business services is just one of the many uh, is just one of the many things, not like the primary thing. So okay, include, okay. Now it would have been nice to see a breakdown on how much we expect in each of these categories, but okay, well, let's see if we can dig out this data in some way or the other. About 31% of that increase came from coal, typically used to produce steel or electricity, and 30% from potassium chloride used in potash based agricultural fertilizers. Okay. This year, Canada's merchandise exports to Indonesia grew by 530 million from January to September compared to the same period last year. So, this is the growth amount, not the absolute. And that's about $500 million, which is actually a huge amount. Okay, about 31% of that increase came from coal. Okay, to produce steel or electricity. What would be nice is if Canada can produce the steel itself and then export it. A point I've already made earlier, that at the end of the day, you want to sell a product that has the highest value add. Electricity, of course, they'll have to produce their own. 30% from potassium chloride used in potash based agricultural fertilizers. It would be nice to see what Canada's capacity to produce agricultural fertilizers is. Like, what's the production capacity there? And if anyone's watching this, please, if you have any knowledge on this, please put something in the comments on that. Would love to be able to learn a little more on this. Finally, Sidhu said Indonesia is also keen on Canadian technology that could reduce the environmental impact of mining. I'm not, I mean, this hasn't showed up in the news cycle in any way. So, अब वो ये कहने के लिए कह दिया होगा, तो हाँ हमको भी है कि environmental impact, this obsession with environment needs to, I hope we can see a little bit of a reduction, but I'm seeing the rhetoric go down a little bit, which is not a bad thing. But yeah, फिर वो ये हर आर्टिकल में कहीं ना कहीं से तो डाल ही देते हैं. See, again, I'm not saying you should forget about the environment. I'm not trying to say that this should be something that we should stop focusing on. All I'm saying is, if you want to mine things out of the ground, you're good. You are impacting the environment. Every time you grow wheat, which then gets made into bread, you impact the environment. Every time you turn on a television, which is getting electricity, maybe from a coal-fired plant somewhere, you're impacting the environment. So I'm all for reducing the environmental impact, but the obsession with it, well, has played a large part in why Canada is finding itself where it is. This leads me sort of really well into what I wanted to conclude with. Let me pull that up. Last article for the day. There we go. Right? Liberal climate policies damaged our economy. I mean, this is a pretty, they have made a statement on this, but they put Prime Minister Carney's picture, which I think is slightly unfair because till now the Carney administration is doing a lot of things in the correct direction. But it obviously says Justin Trudeau's policies amounted to Canada cutting its own economic throat, given the importance of the oil and gas sector to our economy. I would say not just the oil and gas sector. This goes back to mining itself. You want to sell minerals, you're going to have to dig them out of the ground. Um, and once you have dug out that mineral, no matter what else you put back there, it's not what naturally occurred over there. So I don't know when they say they want to look at environmental impact. What you could say is, okay, let's maybe restrict it a little bit, but if you restrict it too much, then the way you want to substitute that to have an economy is, okay, let's start pumping up real estate prices. How do you do that? We let in a lot of people, and we know the rest. So I'll be covering that in a different context, most likely later today. So hold on to that thought, guys. Let's see. We go back to then Prime Minister Jean Chrétien signing on to the United Nations Kyoto Accord in 1998, committing Canada to economy-killing climate targets. As top Chrétien aide Eddie Goldenberg later acknowledged, the Liberals knew they couldn't achieve. And I think I'm glad to see Prime Minister Carney come out and say that likely we're not going to meet the so-called 2030 target, 2035 target. All this is मतलब I think इसका article में तो खैर it's goes in a different direction, but all I'm gonna say is I'm glad to see that Prime Minister Carney is acknowledging the reality, right? मतलब 41 million है यहाँ पे कनाडा में 4 करोड़ 41 million. If anyone has any if anyone is in thinking of how many people that is basically the population of Delhi and Mumbai combined. 4 करोड़ उतने में आ जाते हैं. And you have this vast country, second largest country in the world, which has only 41 million people, one of the lowest density countries in the world. Let's say Canada meets all of its climate change targets, then what? Canada is left with no economy. And when you have a population that lives 200 kilometers from the US border, a lot of that population lives 200 kilometers from that border, a country that, at least at one point was consuming 25% of the world's energy. Maybe it's gone down in recent years, but this is more coming from my 2014-15 era, right? They produce a lot, then they consume a lot. यार तुम्हारा जो net zero है, that makes no impact. Let's get real. Can keep this in the back pocket for now. Focus on the immediate issues of taking up the standard of living of all the people who call this country their home. And then once you have enough money in the bank, then you can start rethinking about all these items. And I would say that there needs to be laws that should be enacted to ensure that there is no overreach on either side. I'm not saying let's go cut down every forest and let's squeeze out every patch of oil sand and sell everything. No. We don't want to become a Nauru. But it shouldn't just be that, okay, let's conserve everything, but we are left with nothing at the end of it. That we don't even have a economy to look at. And I will be talking about this point. I'm trying to schedule that live maybe for the evening, and I'll connect it to the healthcare system of Canada. So guys, I think that's all for today. That's all for this one anyway. I will be doing another live in the evening, so please do join for that. Otherwise, please do like, share and subscribe. Please comment. अगर आपको कुछ अच्छा लगे वो भी बताओ. अगर आपको गाली देनी है आप गाली भी दो. But yeah, till then, thank you for your time everyone, and hope you're having a great holiday season. Chalo, bye for now.